Imagine a world, in the space of a breath, where millions vanish, leaving behind chaos as silent monuments to their absence. Cars colliding, planes plummeting, clothes piled high where bodies once stood. This is the stark portrayal of the 2014 film Left Behind, starring the esteemed Nick Cage. Cage embodies an airline pilot whose co-pilot and countless passengers simply ceased to exist. Indeed, across the globe, millions have disappeared. Those taken were believers, ascended to paradise, while the rest, the unbelievers, were left behind. The film draws inspiration from a series of best-selling books, outlining a future where true believers are whisked away to heaven before the arrival of a formidable adversary. This decisive moment is termed the rapture, the sudden, physical removal of all living believers from this world into the presence of the divine. While the Left Behind franchise is perhaps the most recognized depiction of this prophetic genre, for many devout believers, the notion of the rapture transcends fiction. They firmly believe in its inevitable reality. The theology surrounding the rapture, as interpreted by many, rests on several key tenets. First, the rapture itself, the instantaneous disappearance of believers at any given moment, specifically a pre-tribulation rapture, suggesting that this removal occurs before a period of global adversity and suffering known as the tribulation. During this time, a human adversary, the Antichrist, will rise to power. Finally, at the culmination of the tribulation, the second coming will occur. Jesus Christ will return, resurrecting all believers and dispensing judgment upon sinners. He will defeat the Antichrist, imprison the devil, and establish an earthly kingdom lasting 1,000 years. The millennial kingdom. After this millennium, a final confrontation with the forces of darkness will ensue, leading to the devil's eternal demise in a lake of fire. Scholars often refer to this theological framework as dispensational premillennialism, a prominent form of rapture theology among many believers. Premillennial refers to the belief that Jesus will effectively return twice, once before the millennial kingdom in the rapture, and again after the tribulation to establish his kingdom. Dispensational refers to the idea that God's relationship with humanity has evolved through distinct phases, dispensations, throughout history. Each dispensation represents a unique stage in which God interacts with humanity in a specific way. Some envision history as divided into 7 dispensations, with humanity currently poised on the threshold of the penultimate one, on the brink of the world's end. While the belief in the second coming of Christ is a widespread tenet, this particular view of the end times is not universally shared. The doctrine of the rapture is not typically promoted. However, its presence is undeniable, and the popularity of prophetic narratives such as Left Behind suggests that this view holds a significant place in the cultural consciousness. One historian describes dispensationalism as perhaps the most resilient popular theological movement in American history. These beliefs have even cast a shadow upon the realm of foreign policy, with figures openly expressing their conviction in the rapture's inevitability. But where does this notion of a pre-tribulation rapture originate? Its proponents often cite a specific passage from the Apostle Paul's writings, a passage they believe alludes to a rapture-like event. 1 Thessalonians, chapter 4, verses 16 and 17. The Lord himself, with a cry of command, with the archangel's call, and with the sound of God's trumpet, will descend from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we who are alive, who are left, will be caught up in the clouds, together with them to meet the Lord in the air, and so we will be with the Lord forever. But what does it truly signify? It is essential to acknowledge the scholarly uncertainties surrounding its interpretation. It is considered among the most enigmatic passages in the entire New Testament. As scholars have noted, the cultural and intellectual context of being caught up in the clouds with the Lord remains obscure, but let us endeavor to unravel its meaning. This verse emerges from a letter penned by Paul to a community concerned about the delayed return of Christ, particularly as some members had already passed away without witnessing the second coming. Paul offers an interpretation of what will befall those who have already died, concluding with words of encouragement. He seeks to console those who believe that the return of Christ should have already transpired. New Testament scholars suggest that the imagery of ancient imperial military processions underlies this passage, The text describes the Lord himself descending from heaven with a cry of command, echoing the arrival of an emperor visiting a colony, accompanied by trumpets and symbols of authority. When Paul speaks of meeting the Lord in the air, the term used translates to a technical term for the act of greeting a dignitary or monarch from another city. Thus, the people meeting Christ in the clouds represent an imperial delegation, escorting the emperor into the city. It is not a permanent ascension into the clouds, but a welcoming procession. Concluding that this passage does not depict a rapture, but the resurrection at the end of days, the colorful metaphor of escorting Jesus, the emperor, into the city. Another interpretation suggests that Paul drew inspiration from ancient Jewish beliefs that the chosen people would gain the ability to fly at the end of days. Isaiah chapter 60 verse 8 speaks of those who fly like a cloud, like doves to their coats. These words are seen as a reference to the white sails of ships bringing the Israelites back from diaspora, but later interpreted as people literally flying at the end of the world. According to rabbinic texts, Jerusalem will transform into a floating city, accessible through flight. Thus, the people being taken up in 1 Thessalonians May 4 be seen as traveling via cloud to reach the end of days, Jerusalem floating in the sky. But scholars remain uncertain. Paul describes the resurrection event at the end of days. With the metaphor of escorting Jesus, the notion of being whisked away would have been foreign to Paul. Rapture theology has interpreted this passage alongside other apocalyptic verses in the Gospels. Matthew 24 speaks of two in the field, one taken and one left. This verse has partially inspired the depiction of the rapture in film, sudden disappearance, but it remains ambiguous as to who is being taken and who is being left. A parallel passage in Luke 17 offers greater clarity. Those who pause to save their belongings are swept away to judgment, while those who are left behind are the ones to be saved. Without the context of 1 Thessalonians, a rapture would not be inferred. The New Testament speaks of a second coming, but these verses, taken alone, do not depict the sudden disappearance of believers. But from where then did the idea of a pre-tribulation rapture truly arise? It is often attributed to John Nelson Darby, an Englishman of the 1800s, but let us explore the subtle indications that some believed in a pre-tribulation rapture-like event even earlier. These glimpses exist in a small number of ancient texts, analyzed almost exclusively by pro-rapture theologians. First, the Apocalypse of Elijah, a text circulated among Egyptian Christians in the 3rd century CE. The Christ will pity those who are his own, and he will send from heaven his angels. Those upon whose forehead the name of Christ is written will be taken up. The rescued believers are led into a liminal place, simply called the Holy Land. It is unclear if the author means the land of Israel. Here, Jesus rescues Christians from the destruction of the earth, but they remain on earth in a safe place. Another example is the Apocalypse of Pseudo-Ephraim from the 7th or 8th centuries. All the saints and elect of God are gathered prior to the tribulation that is to come and are taken to the Lord lest they see the confusion that is to overwhelm the world. Because of our sins, scholars have described the end times theology found in this text as confused. Christians are still on earth during the tribulation. The saints will be protected by God within the tribulation rather than removed from it. In the 14th century, the history of Brother Dulcino mentions a rapture-like teaching among a renegade monastic order. The members of the Apostolic Brethren will be caught up into heaven 3.5 years into the reign of the Antichrist. Brother Dulcino himself would return to earth as Pope. This text was composed by an opponent of the Apostolic Brethren. Therefore, we should be skeptical. Only Dulcino's followers would be transferred into paradise, not the whole of Christianity, and it is Brother Dulcino who returns to earth. God will rescue some or all Christians and spare them from the tribulation. But these texts do not mirror modern rapture theology. 2 of our 3 examples suggest that Christians remain on earth during the tribulation, and the third describes a small group of one man's disciples. For that we need to turn to John Nelson Darby, known as the father of dispensationalism, the 1830s, the Plymouth Brethren, a group of anti-establishment Christians who claim to read the Bible literally. Darby systematized and popularized the idea of the rapture within his theological system. Darby argued that history is divided into dispensations, the age of the church, but even this dispensation is headed for ruin. A small remnant of Christians was destined to be saved. Darby taught that the church dispensation would end with the rapture, a two-stage return of Jesus. These ideas were not novel. Darby was not making entirely novel contributions on any of these points, but he was shaping a new type of Christian identity. Plymouth Brethren preachers started to bring their ideas to North America, where they found a receptive audience. Dwight L. Moody, based in Chicago, he started teaching premillennial ideas. Moody thought he was living in the final days. Cyrus Scofield launched a second career as a theologian and preacher. He was part of the Whole to Dwight L. Moody movement, and he started preaching within the local Moody network of congregations where he adopted dispensationalist ideas. He went on to publish the Scofield Reference Bible in 1909. The Scofield Bible has a subheading above Genesis chapter 1 verse 28 calling it the first dispensation. Imagine a hidden thread woven through centuries, a secret code embedded in ancient texts, promising a dramatic escape from earthly tribulation. This is the story of the rapture, a belief that has captivated and divided millions. In the sacred text of 1 Thessalonians, chapter 4, verse 16, a seed of hope was planted. The Scofield Bible, a trusted guide for many, nurtured this seed, interpreting the passage as a prophecy of a two-stage resurrection, explicitly naming it the first resurrection. Through footnotes and subheadings, the Scofield Reference Bible crafted a pre-millennial dispensationalist framework, presenting itself as a scholarly authority. This interpretation, though popular, disregarded competing viewpoints and rejected critical biblical scholarship, which resonated deeply within fundamentalist circles. The Scofield Bible became a phenomenon, selling over 1 million copies within a decade and exceeding 2 million by the end of World War II. It effectively spread dispensationalist ideas, including the rapture, solidifying its place within American evangelical culture. By the mid-20th century, the rapture became a staple of end-times thinking, amplified by the anxieties of the Cold War, as people sought religious explanations for global events like the rise of the Soviet Union and the establishment of the modern state of Israel. Hal Lindsey, a graduate from Dallas Theological Seminary, emerged as a prominent voice, interpreting geopolitics through the lens of dispensationalism. His book, The Late Great Planet Earth, became a mega bestseller, selling millions of copies and entering the bloodstream of American culture, making the word rapture a household term. It sparked a wave of books, radio shows, and movies monetizing dispensationalist theology and rapture predictions. Among these authors was Tim LaHaye, who co-wrote the Left Behind series in the 1990s, selling 80 million copies and arguably shaping belief in the rapture more than any theologian. However, in the 21st century, a shift began to occur. Within the evangelical intelligentsia, a tension arose with popular evangelical belief. D.R. Hummel observed a decline in dispensationalist theology in the 2020s, with the rise of New Calvinism, led by figures like John Piper, who explicitly rejected the concept of a pre-tribulation rapture. N.T. Wright, an Anglican theologian and scholar, also challenged rapture theology, while evangelical universities and denominations, once strongholds of dispensationalism, began to distance themselves from the doctrine. Today, while the rapture remains popular, particularly through pop dispensational writings like the Left Behind series, its theological foundation has weakened. Some historians even consider it a form of folk evangelicalism, as the support from evangelical theologians and institutions has diminished. Belief in the rapture, once on the fringe of evangelical theology, may be returning to the periphery. The story of the rapture is intertwined with the yearning for meaning and hope in the face of uncertainty. The question of Jesus' delayed return prompted Christians to grapple with new theological frameworks.